Discussions in Depth Psychology is powered by Pacifica Graduate Institute. Your host is Bonnie Bright. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Discussions in Depth Psychology, which is powered by Pacifica Graduate Institute. I'm Bonnie Bright, and I'm a graduate of Pacifica in the Depth Psychology program there. And I'm really pleased to be able to bring to you discussions with some of the individuals who are contributing to the world in depth psychological ways. And today my guest is Alexandra Rusu, who is a depth-oriented psychotherapist and a recipient of the MFT Consortium Stipend. And this is for individuals who are pursuing graduate degrees in marriage and family therapy. And the MFT Consortium of California represents academic institutions with graduate programs in marriage and family therapy, and it also awards educational stipends throughout the state. And so, as I mentioned, Alexandra is one of these recipients. Alexandra, I'm really excited to talk to you today about your work and also about the stipend that you received. Thanks so much for spending some time with me.
It's good to be here. Thank you.
Well, I'm glad to have you here. I think that this is such an important program, and it's one of several incentive programs which is funded through the Mental Health Services Act. And, of course, the long-range objective of the MFT stipend program is to promote public mental health as a career option for those who are entering the MFT profession. So it's really great, Alexandra, that you have had the honor, really, of receiving the stipend, and I know that it is allowing you to further your work and move on into the clinical field with your degree and be able to do something that is obviously of tremendous importance to you, and I think is also such a wonderful gift to the community that you're able to serve. So let me read the bio for Alexandra so that everybody has a little bit more background on her. Alexandra Rusu is a depth-oriented psychotherapist in training and a busy mother of four, as well as an artist. She's finishing her MA from Pacifica in 2017, and her BA from Naropa University focused on transpersonal psychology and comparative religious studies. Alexandra also spent over a decade as a massage therapist and has also taught yoga and meditation to adults and children. And coming to Pacifica, she says, is a culmination of everything she has learned in the body, mind, and spirit field up until now. So, Alexandra, I really like that because that also indicates that you know or feel that you have more to learn, and of course we always all do, but you also have a really strong background in a number of things that will work really well with depth psychology. So I wonder if we can begin with understanding a little bit about how and why you are pursuing this degree in counseling. Have you known for a long time that it's something that you wanted to do?
Yes. I think I have known for a long time that I wanted to do counseling. I just didn't know that that's what it was. I remember as young as 5 just sitting in on grownups conversations so I could listen to their stories. I always loved hearing people's stories, and I wondered how they came to be in the situations that they were in. I was always really curious about people's emotions and very fascinated by the human body and how easily it would be affected by what people thought. Like, I just intuitively always sensed that. I saw how, when my parents were stressed out, they would get headaches, or when, their friends would come and complain about something, they just didn't look as good. So there was always this connection with the body and the mind for me. And when I was in high school, I remember having this sort of adolescent fantasy that I wanted to just run off and be a monk or a nun somewhere and just be learning more about spiritual life and just immerse myself in that. And then I wanted to become a doctor. Well, really, I think what I wanted to become was a counselor. It's really combining those two things together. I just didn't know that that's what that was. Because, being a spiritual seeker, I think that's what clients come to you for, is that they're searching for something. And also wanting to be a doctor is that wanting to heal. I feel like as therapists, we are healers in a way. We're more maybe like midwives of the soul. So I guess it was something that was always in me. I just didn't know what to call it. And now being at Pacifica and almost finishing the program, I realized, oh, that's it. This is what I've always wanted to do. And I tried doing that through massage therapy. I tried doing that through work as a yoga teacher. And it's the same thing. It's just it comes in different forms.
Yeah, I love that you tied that into stories, too, because everybody has a story, of course, and as you mentioned, it seems like we're all searching for something, and that's a very natural process in our life to always be wanting to become more whole, maybe, as Jung would look at it. Sometimes we don't know that that's what it is that we're searching for. Often we don't even know what it is that we're searching for. We just feel that there's something that's missing in our lives or something that needs to be moved forward or progressed in some way. And so I really love that you're touching on the idea of listening and listening to people's stories in particular. But there was also one phrase that you just used, which is kind of telling, and that is you suggested that maybe counseling is a bit like being a midwife of the soul. And I love that phrase. I think it's beautifully descriptive of exactly what it is that therapists and counselors do. But you kind of gave away something in that phrase, and that is that you really often have to have a depth psychological orientation to be able to speak about the soul in that kind of way. Or I should say maybe depth psychology is a field in which we often use that term soul, and we look at things from the perspective of the soul. And so that leads me into my next question for you, and that is wondering how it is that you actually became interested in a program with a depth psychological approach as opposed to some other program.
Well, I just have always loved Jungian psychology. My parents were hippies that had Jung's books all over the house. So I grew up reading it, talking about it. I had a good understanding of it. I think I've just always been really comfortable in that space and that kind of outlook on life, meaning like in depth psychology, everything comes from the unconscious. It's where we live our lives from. And everything, all our actions, everything we think comes from a much deeper source. So to me, that is the most meaningful place to be in, and the only place I could really provide that for me was Pacifica. I looked at other programs, and it just didn't even touch what Pacifica offered in that sense. I never felt like there was that, I call it a spiritual connection. I didn't feel that in other schools, but I did feel that at Pacifica because of the influence of Jung's work that's so heavily imbued in everything that we do there. Plus, I attended more alternative undergrad programs such as Global College and Naropa, where I traveled a lot, and a lot of what we did in these programs had to do with self-reflection and fostering a lot more of a depth view of yourself and the world. And I also have been seeing a Jungian analyst for a very long time, which helped me tremendously, more than any other regular therapist ever had. So I honestly don't think I could be in any other program besides Pacifica because it acknowledges soul. And plus, also the campus is absolutely beautiful, so that was another plus for me. So just all around, Pacifica was just where I felt comfortable.
Yeah, I completely understand that, of course, and having had the benefit, obviously, of being able to go there myself. And I know not everybody has that benefit, but I do consider myself really lucky to have been able to do that. And you mentioned the campus, just actually in passing, but the campus itself is a really profoundly amazing place. And I think that in depth psychology, we often talk about the spirit of a place, or the capacity of a place to be its own entity, right, and to have its own intelligence and to be very soulful. And so I really like that you brought that in, because for me, when I think about being someplace that is as soulful as I personally consider Pacifica itself, it also is, it's almost like it's a player in the educational process that I experienced while I was there. It's almost like it was another student or another person in the cohort on some level.
Yeah.
Do you remember stories, or do you remember some of your experiences of just being there, or maybe when you first saw the campus?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I have two favorite trees on campus that I always go to. One is in front of the Ladera Lane campus, which you can even see the ocean from that spot on the hill. I don't know if you know which one I'm talking about, but I don't even know what kind of tree it is, but there's this really big tree, and it's got a bench nearby. I always go to that tree, or I go to this other tree more in the back of the campus that has these tree stumps around it. And I think people put some prayer flags up there now and all sorts of rocks and trinkets. It's just sort of gathered over time with all sorts of interesting things. And when I really want to be alone and just think, I go to those tree stumps. And sometimes I'll just go to that other tree and just lay down on the ground by the roots. And I also love the Marion Woodman Rose Garden that was put up, I think, just last year. Just walking around that rose garden and smelling the roses. And there's also a plaque in the middle of the garden that it's a tribute to Marion Woodman, and I memorized it. It says, "Ride your horse along the edge of the sword, hide yourself in the middle of the flames. Blossoms of the fruit tree will bloom in the fire. The sun rises in the evening." It's a Zen koan, and I just love Marion Woodman. That's actually another reason why I went to Pacifica, because she used to teach there. And, combining all my interests and then coming to the campus where those people that I've always read, Jung, Marion Woodman, it's like it comes alive when you're on campus. And seeing things like that plaque in the middle of the Rose Garden, it just feels so good to be there. I feel so lucky and grateful to be in a place that is like no other. I don't think I could ever have that same experience like I had at Pacifica, because it's just so beautiful.
Yeah, I completely understand exactly what you're saying. And I'm also really interested in the way that you were describing your experience of walking around the campus and relating to the trees and to the roses and to the landscape that's there. Were there times in the counseling program that you actually discussed how nature plays a part in our healing and in the wholeness of ourselves? And is that something that you think or envision being able to bring to clients in the future as a therapist that can help them to heal or to transform?
Oh, yeah, completely. We discussed it a little bit in class. I think I remember one class in particular with Stephen Eisenstadt in the very beginning, where we talked about the connection with nature and how everything dreams, even nature dreams, and that comes up in our dreams when we're in different places. I would have liked to focus more on that. I think that would be something in the future that they could bring into the program, but I definitely plan on bringing that into my own work for sure. I mean, we're earth-spawned beings, so there is this intricate connection between us and nature, even though we might not realize it, and to connect the two together is something that does create a more whole human. So I think that's integral to the therapy that I'm going to do for sure.
Yeah. And the other thing that you mentioned, I think it's so important, is that one of the reasons that you were so drawn to the program at Pacifica, especially, was its focus on Jung's work and Jungian psychology specifically. And I know we mentioned that you had focused on transpersonal psychology when you were at Naropa. So I'm wondering if you can share maybe just some of what has really appealed to you most about Jung's work. What aspects, or are there any specific works of his that have really profoundly influenced you most? Because I think this kind of brings us to a discussion of transpersonal psychology and also depth psychology. And it's not that Jung is not included in both. We often say that Jung is kind of the founder of depth psychology. He's one of the founders. It's true. And all psychology came from that same group of people. But I'm just wondering if you could maybe make some comparison between transpersonal psychology and then the added value that you saw to have that additional focus on Jung while you were in your program.
Well, I guess another name for transpersonal psychology would be spiritual psychology, which I feel that depth psychology also is, but it's not acknowledged as much as it would be in a transpersonal psychology program. And also Naropa was different because it had a very strong Buddhist influence. Everything we did in the beginning at the end of class was meditate, and it came back to the Shambhala teachings of Chogyam Trungpa, who was a Buddhist monk that founded Naropa. Whereas at Pacifica, it doesn't have just that one strong influence from one set of teachings. It's more eclectic, and it feels like really anyone could be there. You don't have to be just focused on this one particular set of teachings or lean in one particular way. It just feels more accepting and more whole. And to me, it's very similar when you get down to the essence of it. Jungian psychology and transpersonal psychology, they seem very similar to me because Jung himself was a very spiritual person. And in his book, Memory, Dreams, Reflections, which was one of my favorites, he talked about the experiences he had while exploring his own internal depths, and some of it was straight out scary for him. He didn't know what was going on. And what I appreciate at Pacifica is that scariness and that darkness is really accepted, and there's this earthiness to it where the darkness of what we all hold is accepted, and you feel like you can look at it, whereas sometimes in other programs that are really spiritual, there's almost this flightiness where you kind of get caught up in the light side, but you need both. So I guess what I appreciated most about my time in Pacifica and what I've learned from Jung's teachings, which is a big influence at the school, is that there is this appreciation and this acceptance and curiosity of the darkness.
Yes, and when you end up working with clients this capacity to be able to explore those darknesses in a very grounded way seems like it's absolutely crucial. So
yeah.
I know that as part of the stipend that you've received, you will be working with clients in your own community for a year. That's part of the process. And so can you share a little bit about how you envision working with clients? Do you already have actually some experience, or is this going to be a brand new opportunity for you?
I have been working in my traineeship with a similar population that I'll continue to work with under the stipend. Very low economic and people living below the poverty line, a lot of drug addiction and an immense amount of trauma. And I feel that my training at Pacifica has helped me sit with that in a way that grounds me and doesn't allow me to try to control or fix or escape. So I feel very comfortable in session with clients that have experienced trauma, and if anything, it's actually made me more interested in trauma work, especially somatic psychology, working with the body and dealing with trauma and addictions. I'm also very interested in ADHD work and eating disorders, which I see a lot of in my clients, especially in the children and the adolescents that I work with. I already see in my traineeship my outlook on how I handle the unknown is different from others who attended other schools. Everyone deals with it differently. I'm not saying it's good or bad. It's just that I feel very well prepared and able to sit with that uncomfort and that scary piece of what trauma can hold for a therapist and a client, when you experience that or when you start to work with that. And I think that the reason I even got this stipend actually is because there was a strong focus on multicultural therapists or people who are willing to work with other cultures, which I am completely, having traveled so much all my life, but also having been a political refugee at a young age from a former communist country. I think that maybe that's why I got this stipend. Maybe that was one of the reasons. And also because I live in a population I live in Redding, California, so there is a need for more therapists working with people of other cultures. Not that there's a huge cultural population here. There is a little bit. I would really love to work with more immigrants, especially those who have come to this country for a better life, because I believe that I really understand that struggle, and I would like to work more with that. And I guess what that means for me is that I'll be working in an underserved population, different ethnic and socioeconomic backgrounds, and I'm going to gain a rich experience from that. And I can also use the money that I got from the stipend to pay off my school loans.
Yeah, which is critically important when you are moving out into a new field and you don't know what to expect, to kind of bring that full circle. It's really lovely and wonderful that you have been awarded that. And you piqued my curiosity when you mentioned being a political refugee, and also the fact that may have had some influence on it. Would you be willing to share a little bit about your story? Because it seems like such a critical piece of your background to making you who you are today.
Yeah, I was born in Bucharest, Romania, and it was during the time of Ceaușescu, the dictator at the time. My parents fled with me and my brother when I was 5, and they came to the U.S. to have a better life for us. And there was always this difference between my home life and outside of the home life, being at school and my friends who were more American, and then being in the home, everything was very Romanian. So I felt I always held the two, but I wasn't really sure which one I was more of. And I see that in a lot of immigrants, especially children. And it's funny because growing up, all my friends were immigrants. I grew up in New York and New Jersey. So the people that I was connected with the most were people that came from other countries just like me when I was younger. And now everything that's happening in the world with certain immigrants not being able to come into this country and people who are leaving war-torn countries, the trauma that's innate in that is something that I feel we're going to need therapists for a very long time, because the trauma that comes after that, especially for children, for everybody, is something that we really need to address. I mean, people who have lived in one place all their lives and haven't had to leave a country because of war or the fact that there's not enough food or water or heat, they don't understand the trauma that comes from that. So I think I understand it, and I think that I would like to work with that population in the future.
Yeah, it's such a profoundly important area right now. I'm so thrilled to hear you say that because, like you, I also believe that there is a tremendous need for support for people that have had to leave their homes and are, not settled yet, have not found a new home and may not. And the trauma is a big piece of that. And you've mentioned, actually, that several of your clients are really profoundly traumatized and that they require some help urgently. I'm really also interested in this topic of home, and not just literal home, and I don't mean just in any way that diminishes that at all, because that's one of the very basic requirements that we each need, is to be able to feel like we have a safe haven, some place that we can go home to. But there's also an archetypal aspect of that, of feeling at home in the world, of finding a place where one belongs. What are your thoughts on this idea of an archetypal home and how counseling or therapy might actually help someone, immigrants or even others who are not feeling very at home in the culture that we have somehow managed to create for ourselves right now?
I think therapy can help immensely because the real home is within ourselves. When we're comfortable with that archetype of home within us, and that takes work and it's not easy to find. But when we have upheaval in our life, that's what leads us to finding home within ourselves, when home is nowhere to be found on the outside. So really it just goes back to everything being an inside job. Yeah, I think that if there isn't that trauma on the outside, then you never do the work to find what's on the inside. So in a way, some of the unrest is a gift because it helps you search deeper within yourself.
Yeah, it's so true. Our experience shapes us so profoundly. Of course, we have to be willing, and sometimes it's just a matter of grace, but we have to be willing to open up to doing that inner work, as you mentioned. And some people, I think, go through most of their lives and never quite get there, or they get there at a certain time. Like I remember, it was profound. I remember exactly the moment that I sort of woke up, I guess you could say, and came to some consciousness around that. And it wasn't that I had not been exposed to it before, but there was definitely a turning point for me when I really realized that I was committed to and wanting to do the work of transformation that is required, for the individuation journey. And so I'm just really deeply struck actually, by how your own experience of being an immigrant, of coming to this country under what sounds like was tremendous duress, and I can't even imagine it as a 5-year-old, what that experience must have been like to be completely uprooted. And now you find yourself almost coming full circle to be working with people who are equally traumatized, whether it was from being uprooted literally or psychologically, emotionally, on whatever level. I just find that really profoundly inspiring to hear that story and to know that you are one of those individuals that are out there working with people that need exactly that kind of help and the same kind of help that you probably deeply needed yourself at some point in time.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. It's almost like a divine plan of some sort that happens. So then people go into the underworld and then they come out with something to offer others because they know what that feels like. And if anything, right now, especially what people need to share with each other is that kindness and that compassion for each other, and less of the blame and the harshness that can happen. And really, it starts with one person. It starts with how you choose to see people and how you choose to treat them, because it is like a domino effect. And we see that in our world's leaders right now. We're seeing that in the way people run businesses and the way parents treat their children. It's almost like we're called to lead in a different way. Mm-hmm. If we've been through hurt, we know that we don't want to do that to others. It's always been interesting, though, to me, what, for instance, someone who's been abused, what makes that one person abuse another and what makes the other person who's been through the same abuse not do that, not continue that, but rather choose a different path to heal. So that's also very interesting to me. Like, what is that, And that also makes me want to learn more about trauma and how that really works.
Yes, you and me both. It's really a fascinating topic and such an important one.
Yeah, that, like, the work that I'm doing as a therapist, I also see that extending out into everything else that I do, like my artwork, where I began that by chance working with my first therapist. He would have me paint my emotions during our sessions together, and that turned into a full-blown love of abstract art. And now I do that quite regularly, and I've even begun to sell it. And what's so cool about that whole art process and how I came to it is that when I come in front of the canvas, I never really know what I'm going to paint. It's like when people come into contact with one another, it's that unknown that's there, and the same in therapy. So instead of trying to grasp it or control it or manipulate it, it's like we need to just sit with it sometimes. And if anything, my artwork has reminded me over and over again how we're all a channel for creating something in this world. And I feel like being a therapist or being an artist or whatever your career is, you're a channel for something, and it's just what you choose to do with it. So anyway, I also have my paintings on my website, alexandraroxana.com, if anyone's interested in looking.
Yeah, great, and I highly recommend it. You're actually a very gifted artist. I have been looking at it myself, and I'm really thrilled, actually, more than anything, to hear that process of creating art came from the process of psychotherapy. That's something that was initiated and generated from that process of seeking to work on yourself and doing that same kind of inner work that we were talking about. And what I think, too, about something like visual art that you can see, well, any kind of art, really, but especially paintings, when I happen to look at them, I feel like I develop my own sort of relationship with that painting. We enter into a dialogue. And so whatever your relationship was to that painting when you created it, that actually goes out into the world and begins making its own relationships with anybody who happens to see it or experience it. And so I think that's really profound. And inevitably what that means is it's also very healing for everyone.
Yes. And it's more like it's the process of it, not even the finished product. It's just so rich with experience, and that is what transforms. It's the process.
Well, this is just wonderful, Alexandra. I'm so happy to hear about your work, and it's, again, just so greatly needed. I'm thrilled that you have been able to receive the MFT Consortium Stipend, because I do know that this is making you more available to be able to go out into the world and to work with people that really are welcoming it and needing it and wanting it so much. So I so appreciate your time today. I've been speaking with Alexandra Rusu, who is a depth-oriented psychotherapist in training, as well as an artist. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today, Alexandra.
Thank you, Bonnie.
You've been listening to Discussions in Depth Psychology, powered by Pacifica Graduate Institute with host Bonnie Bright. Learn more at pacificapost.com or at pacifica.edu.